Hi. Hi, everyone. How are we doing? My name is Rhyen Staley, and I'm a researcher with Parents Defending Education. And I'm very excited for our guest today. Dr. Scott Yenor is a professor of political science at Boise State, the Washington Fellow at the Claremont Institute, and he is the author of The Recovering of Family Life, Exposing the Limits of Modern Ideologies. Scott, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan. I appreciate it.
So, Scott, Parents Defending Education recently released a report called CorruptED. And in this report, we detailed the ideological courses that are taught to elementary education majors and also graduate level majors that no doubt trickle down into K 12 classrooms. This expands on your report about the University of Florida titled Making Kindergarten Teachers into Radicals. Could you tell us a little bit about this report and some of the findings that you and your colleagues found?
Yeah, Florida has passed a law, number 1291 this last year, in which they are re-regulating teacher certification rules. And the goal of that law is to claim that they're not going to certify schools of education that have built into their curriculum ideas of systematic oppression, the idea that the country is irredeemably racist or sexist.
Mhm.
And so we were interested to see whether or not the University of Florida, the flagship university in Florida, had programs that were like in violation of that new law. So what we did is just give an account, like we identified and got the syllabi from all of the courses that are required to get an elementary education major at the University of Florida. And then we analyzed those syllabi for their course descriptions, for their readings, their assignments, and for their learning outcomes to see if indeed those ideas of systematic oppression, that America was irredeemably racist and sexist, were sewn into many of the courses that were being taught for elementary education majors. And lo and behold, we discovered that there had been a revolution at the University of Florida in 2020 after the Floyd riots. They had changed their curriculum substantially from what it was before. Gone were, normal reading courses and teaching methods courses and classroom discipline courses, and arrived were courses that, were based on ideas that now violated Florida law. We analyzed the syllabi, and then we just gave an account of how many of the courses were required. There was about 20 courses required, and about 11 of them had had these ideas of systematic oppression sewn into the course descriptions, course learning outcomes, and readings. And so we just the report was giving an account of that particular major. We believe that other majors have the same problems, but we didn't do a systematic account of those majors. And I think we demonstrated to our satisfaction and hopefully to the satisfaction of the regulators in Florida that this particular education program, and perhaps the entire School of Education at the University of Florida, are now running afoul of the teacher certification rules and must be re-regulated.
Excellent. And I want to add in, because of your excellent work, I was actually able to discover that a lot of the universities across the state of Florida use, if not the same exact designation for courses, but very similar. And we were able to track down other schools within the state that are doing the same thing. So your work obviously has some has benefited what we were looking into as well. Inside your report, I want to ask you a couple questions, maybe for those listening to help clarify if they're not familiar with this information. You hit on that these schools interjected what is called equity pedagogy, or also critical pedagogy is another name that is often associated with this. Could you kind of very briefly define those terms, and then also a second piece of that is what is it about the word critical that's different from the traditional usage?
Yeah, so let's start with the second question about the word critical. The word critical, people think it has some sort of positive connotation sometimes, like We think we're being critical thinkers and all of this. But actually, I don't think the word critical adds anything to the word critical thinking. Thinking is thinking. Critical is a species or an approach to knowledge where you claim to see through the reality in front of you and find some deeper, truer thing. So, and usually it's an oppressive action. So when we look at, say, a classroom, we see that some students are disciplined more than others. That's like your normal approach to looking at it. What critical pedagogy does is that it tries to find patterns of oppression in how we define like bad behavior in a classroom. So, like sitting still or getting your homework in on time end up being like white standards of behavior that are being imposed onto other people. That's what a critical pedagogue would find. And so I think of critical as seeing through the surface in order to find an apparently deeper reason for what is going on. And that reason is usually some sort of oppression. Now, equity pedagogy is how University of Florida's elementary major organized itself. And what equity pedagogy was is just like critical pedagogy with an emphasis on achieving equal outcomes among the students. Whenever there wasn't an equal outcome among the students, we had a pedagogy problem that had to be fixed so that equity could be achieved among the students. And I think they basically used the word equity instead of critical because they were worried about being tarred with the brush of critical race. Uh,
Mhm.
and so they like used other terms that weren't as easily stigmatized. I think it's kind of a shell game there.
So Scott, in your report, you hit on a part of the one of these programs with critical literacy, correct? And can you describe what that is and how that plays? Because I have an anecdote from my teaching professional career that I want to highlight with that to give parents a perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the emphasis that in the University of Florida program was on cultural. The old emphasis used to be on cultural literacy, that students would need to know the important markers of our history, important authors of our history. And they've replaced cultural literacy with what they called racial literacy. And what racial literacy is how to look at American history through the lens of race being the most prominent idea and reality in the country. And I would say that one of the emphasis would be like we're no longer going to know that George Washington had wooden teeth, but we are going to know that he was bad because
Mhm.
he had slaves. And we're no longer going to know that he was the Revolutionary War general. That would be cultural literacy. But we are going to know how to condemn him for not, uh, immediately emancipating all of his slaves. And
So
that's the new emphasis.
So it's critical race theory or whatever theory, queer theory, whatever it is that they're interjecting in, but it's not directly visible,
Yeah,
especially to the parent.
exactly. It's difficult to find the stuff, but that's the beating heart and the magnet of it is kind of drawing everything in that direction.
So I want to add this. So when I was teaching even at a Catholic school back in the day, so about 2015, 2016, a counterpart teacher was teaching the story, The Crucible. And people can look that up if they are not familiar with it. But it's set in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1600s. But the teacher would have constant conversations in the classroom that were centered around the patriarchy and the oppression of women. Does that fit what you're alluding to?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there isn't as much of that in the Florida example as there is in of race stuff, but all of the general approach, the critical approach, finding oppression underneath the surface of things is the definition of this.
Okay. I want to highlight something from our report with Portland State, and I want your take on it. I'm going to read verbatim here. The Portland State University College of Education states that its vision is for educators and counselors to create a just and equitable world, end quote. Degree programming is centered around the idea of the teacher as activist. The program includes touchstones for anti-bias, anti-racist educators, which states that the school's elementary ed program is guided by, quote, recognizing the histories of colonization, settler colonialism, white supremacy, imperialism, and neoliberalism upon which the United States and its systems of education have all been built and sustained, end quote. Content in this course featured required courses include such topics as white supremacy culture, forms of oppression and privilege, critical race theory, and queer theory. So when you look at this information or you hear this information, what stands out to you, and why is it problematic?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what stands out is how normal it is in schools of education. I mean, this seems to be a common theme that you have in most schools of education. You know, in the Florida report that we did, I would say more than half of the required courses to get an elementary education major
Mm-hmm.
had precisely this same kind of emphasis. And University of Portland is kind of in a famously progressive city, so it's not shocking that they would be more on the cutting edge and probably had this stuff sewn into their stuff earlier than University of Florida had.
Mm-hmm.
But just all the studies that have been done on this show that this method of teaching, or this approach to teaching, is endemic. It's all around the country, in prominent universities and in smaller, less prestigious universities alike. So nothing really surprises me about that. As I say, it's very common. I think there's two approaches to this, or there's two ways I think about what the issues are here. And that the first thing is that, are these teachers really able to be teachers? That is, there's only so many courses that are taken in a school of education. And in order to teach courses with this kind of emphasis, you're teaching courses that don't have other kinds of emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whereas, degree programs used to have courses like core teaching strategies. Those have all been replaced by equity pedagogy strategies, or they used to teach core classroom management strategies. And now they're teaching courses like rethinking discipline and classroom management in order to be an equity informed teacher. They used to teach courses like elementary science content, and now it's elementary science methods for the inclusive classroom. And so it's hard to imagine that the teachers that are being produced by this are as competent just at the core elements of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, they're kind of advertising it. They don't care as much about that. They want teachers who will make students into activists. Like, that's the goal, not basic competence. So I think, like, the education system itself is got to be less competent at doing the basics because they're not emphasized. The second thing I would say is that this is kind of a new civic education. Like, all people are going to get this new idea of what it means to be an informed citizen. And that means to be a left-wing activist. So that is bound. I mean, they're doing it in order to transform the country. And so there's going to be downstream political effects for this too. That's the plan. And it's hard to imagine that it hasn't at least partly been worked out now. So, so it corrupts education and it corrupts the country. But besides that, it's doing a great job.
I want to share that, it's kind of hard to blame, especially the young teachers, the young students who are 20 years old going through these programs. Because with the Portland State program, for example, it's an elementary ed program, which you also highlighted. in your report, et cetera, which I think should be a major red flag, because these teachers are not going and working with, university students, but these are teachers that are going to go into the classroom with 9, 8-year olds, et cetera. And what they learn in the universities, the intent is that they're going to do it in their K-12 classroom, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, they're educating educators in critical theory so that those educators will take their critical theory approaches to the classroom.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you're going to see and this has had a profound effect in the classroom. Let's use one concept. So one of the difficulties of studying this stuff is that there's these large concepts like critical pedagogy, and then they get reduced into different areas that teachers should be concerned with. So, for instance, discipline. Let's use discipline as an example. You take critical pedagogy, and it becomes what they call restorative justice when it's reduced to practice in classrooms. And restorative justice means that the discipline is going to be meted out in equitable ways, so that the same number of Black students will be suspended as white students, as Hispanic students are, as a percentage of the population in the school. And if it's not like that, well, then there's something wrong with the school. What this ends up meaning is that you have much different standards for students based on their race, so that because the disruption that students do is not equally distributed according to race. So we take critical pedagogy and we implement restorative justice programs, and that's what's meant by courses that are rethinking discipline and classroom management. They're trying to get people to be sensitive to the idea that different populations should be held to different standards, lower standards and higher standards, depending on your race. And this is how classrooms are run. So classrooms end up being more dangerous for teachers, more difficult to maintain order. And when you can't maintain order in a classroom, it's much more difficult to actually do the job of teaching. And this stuff is very easy to study and discover. The effect of restorative justice programs is to make teachers less effective at delivering the basics of education. It leads to unruly, dangerous classrooms and dangerous schools. But it does achieve its goals. That is, discipline is meted out in a much more equitable manner. And so this stuff is obviously designed to have an effect on how teachers do their jobs and conceive of their jobs.
And that's great that you bring that up. For those who are not familiar with restorative justice, I sat down with Ryan Petty a while back and on a live stream just like this, and we delved deeply into restorative justice, where you can actually hear more about my personal experience as a teacher using restorative justice, and it's exactly what Scott is talking about. Scott, I bring up like how this stuff transfers into classroom, because one of the things we highlight in the Portland State Report is a course that elementary teachers are required to take. It's on transformative social emotional learning, which I have to believe kind of goes along with your assessment that they're replacing classroom discipline with courses like this, which is, so we're gonna start looking at the kids' social emotional state and try to fix them that way. And what's disturbing about that course in particular is that they have the students in, so we're talking 20-year-old students or 19-year-old students in this course, and they're being subjected to activities such as, demonstrating their privilege. Like if they're a white male Christian, they come from the United States was even one of the things, and then they're highly privileged. Another thing was teaching them about white supremacy culture and so forth. And so we have to believe that stuff filters from that course into their teaching toolkit that will show up in classrooms around, let's say just to limit things, around the Portland area. Because that's one of the things that we looked at too, was how potentially how many students could be affected by this. And what we came up with now, I mean, these are just broad general numbers, but I mean, 120,000 students in the Portland area with several districts, based on the number of teachers that Portland State produces per year. That stuff filters into the classroom, and it's going to affect a lot of children.
Yeah, transformative social emotional learning is like the restorative justice programs. It's one of these teaching techniques that derives from critical pedagogy and becomes a practice that is embedded into certain classes. It's not the same as critical pedagogy, but it runs in the same rails as it. And what it is designed to do is to get students to feel um, the newly right kind of feelings at various experiences that they're exposed to. So, making white students ashamed of their so-called privilege because they come from a two-parent family,
Mhm.
and making let's say black in this case black students who don't come a two-parent family like to think that that's the normal thing, and you should feel good and proud of that. And so we're trying to transform the way our emotions are based on how the teacher presents the material. And yeah, and the intention is that it will affect classroom behavior. The books that will be chosen, I'm sure you've done shows on some of the strange books that are taught to young children, gender queer and
Mhm.
rainbow unicorn. I can't even remember all the titles of them, but um, uh, um, these books, they're supposed to manipulate the emotions so that the curriculum is really designed around this whole idea of transformative social emotional learning. And yeah, I mean, it's almost a truism to say that you prepare teachers so that they have an effect in the classroom. Like we have to think about other ways that it happens. The people who are designing the curriculum and choosing the books
Mhm.
have been informed through these schools of education. So of course they're going to point it in this direction. And you as a teacher, even if you kind of oppose it, are going to be given the materials to teach this particular kind pedagogical ways.
Yeah.
And I see no way around that. And so totally, it's going to shape what goes on in the classroom. Totally.
Well, and we're seeing this. We saw a report this week from the Federalist, or an op-ed at least, about how Minnesota's licensure programming now makes teachers, especially those who are renewing them, they have to have a cultural competency, which obviously is another fancy name for a lot of the same stuff. So in Minnesota, for example, under Governor Tim Walzer, they have interjected this idea that you have to be proficient and you have to demonstrate that you can apply these things in the classroom. We also produced a report a little while back in the spring on DEI hiring and how we've found in school districts across the country that they're building these ideas into the hiring process to weed out, as you just said, if teachers are not adhering to this, they're going to find themselves not being able to teach or be get good evaluations. In this case, they're not going to get hired. Um, and so, I, you know,
Mhm.
I don't know what the solutions are. I know you present some in your work. Can you delve into that a little bit about uh, how can we, how can parents, how can, those of us who are on the outside of the college realm, um, have some effect on pushback and to start to um, keep our teachers from being indoctrinated in this ideology that'll then eventually filter into their kindergartner's classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two elements of this. I mean, so first of all, the teacher certification process is a political process. It is shaped by laws, as the Federalist article about Tim Waltz and Minnesota standards shows. It's shaped by law, and so the first step I would say is that advocates or I should say, those who oppose this educational transformation should seek alternative ways of certifying teachers. That is not through the normal schools of education, but rather through like professional experience. So, for instance, if you're an actuary, maybe you could teach math, and what your major is should matter instead of going through the schools of education. I think that's like one way you can change that, but that doesn't change this hiring standards
Mhm.
that school districts might have. So ultimately, you can't just ask for an opt out from the current rules. You have to remake the rules. And this is really the way that Florida has approached the topic. Since the teacher certification process is political, they held, let's make it our politics. Let's use the plenary power to certify the certifiers and shape how they will be acting. So Florida passed in 2024 a House bill called 1291 that held that teacher certifications, the state would not certify programs, I should say it like that distort significant historical events or include curriculum or instruction that teaches identity politics or whose corrupt curriculum is based on theories of systemic racism, sexism, oppression, and privilege, as if those are inherent in the United States. So now we have tools that the State Department of Education can use to say, all right, well, you can teach whatever you want in your little school of education, but the products of your school of education are not going to be certified.
Mhm.
And Florida, as far as we know, is the first state that did this. It's something that should be emulated in other states where it can be done, and where it can't be done, people should make a political issue of it. The kind of regulations that they've required of teachers in Minnesota should be used to further, humiliate the political authorities that have done this. And if you don't win, you don't win, but you have to keep, fighting on that basis. So it's kind of a boring area of policy. I mean, it's not like war and peace, but it is like deciding who should become a teacher. For too long, I think conservatives have just looked for opt outs, looked for alternative certification or ending certification. And what the Florida way shows is they can use political power to, reshape these institutions that are providing such corrupt curriculum.
Yeah, I have a question for you along these lines because I could play out in my head some pushback, which is going to be that the university level is known for its academic freedom, and so what's the line here? And I'll have a little personal take on this in a second, but what's the line here that where you're not impeding upon the academic freedom? But at the same time, my concern as a parent is that this stuff is filtering into my child's classroom. So, in a way, these teachers are being trained, they're taking it to the K-12 level, which is entirely different than the academic freedom that we as Americans have valued for so long at the university level. I mean, how do we kind of tread that line?
Yeah, well, I think in both cases, we should recognize that there are public values at stake. So, as I said before, University of Florida School of Education can do whatever it wants, and the state can decide whether or not to certify
Mhm.
their graduates as teachers. Like, I'm not abridging your freedom of academic freedom, but I am using my power to certify teachers. And if you don't listen to me, well, maybe you'll get fewer students, and that'll maybe affect your
Mhm.
college. But like, that's not my problem. My problem is I'm determining what the standards are for who is going to be a teacher.
Gotcha.
And I think the same thing is part of the answer when it comes to what's going on in K through 12 education now. I mean, the state has the power to control what its teachers teach in K through 12. It sets standards. It can require graduates to have an intimate knowledge of English poetry. And if you don't have that, you don't graduate. And instead of emphasizing critical race theory and that approach to American history, you can dictate a different understanding of American history. And then you have to know this stuff to graduate. So I think states just can get more serious about not listening to the professionals who have shown themselves to be corrupt and ideological, and recognize that that education is inherently political and make it directly a political question. And I see no way around that. I think that's what Florida's done. Several states have redone their standards in order to squeeze out the space that might be filled by all these critical theories. And but I think that's the approach to take in K through 12.
Do you have some suggestions for parents? There are some states that have given parents an avenue that if their child comes home with some of this far left ideology in their coursework, child comes home and they've got, an assignment that they've got to do, or they've got to read The Crucible, for example, and they've got to tell why there's the patriarchy and all this other, queer theory or feminist theory type stuff in there. There are some states that give parents a recourse for how to handle that, right? There's a reporting system, et cetera. But most states don't have that. Do you have suggestions for parents on an appropriate process that they can go through when this stuff comes home?
Yeah, I mean, it will all depend on the circumstance, I suppose. The first thing is being able to identify the stuff.
Hmm.
And
Totally.
and I use like just this very simple. I'm a simple country boy on these matters. Use a simple technique, which would be: can this question be answered without reference to some of these categories of oppression? Like, is that what they're fishing for? And when that's what they're fishing for, I would just suggest like going to the teacher and he's saying, yeah, uh, this doesn't seem to be an assignment that actually lends itself to thinking or education. And I'm kind of embarrassed for you that you make such assignments, and then take that kind of complaint up the food chain. Now you may not get very far, but I think that these kind of assignments, you can find them in charter schools, you can find them in public schools, you can find them in private
Hmm.
schools, and so just being somewhat cognizant of that. And I also say, like, your first line of defense on this is your kids. Like, you have to talk to your kids a little bit about the things that they should be worried about finding in school. And when they have problematic assignments, it makes good conversation between parents and children, and you can really educate them a little bit yourself. You should see yourself as the person who's ultimately in charge of education for your children. And if the school that you're in is like bad in all these respects, well, then you have to ask yourself your question: what are you doing with this precious time that you have with your kids? There's other schools to send them to, there are charter schools to send them to, there's homeschooling options. Like, those are short-term ways of getting out from underneath the thumb of a school that is heavy on the indoctrination angle. So, I mean, those are some of my hints. I'm, involved myself, chairman of the board of a classical Christian school here in Idaho,
Oh,
and
great.
we're always worried about making sure that we're doing the right thing by our parents. And so you'd think you just have to have that attitude.
And I want to, share with parents too that, be careful with the teachers only because so many of them, and I know this personally from going through a college of ed program, is that you're sold by the professors that, well, this is best practice. All of this crazy stuff that's going on. By the way, in 2007, when I went through a program at a small liberal arts college, they were in the process of changing over their mission statement, which in hindsight now is the movement towards what we're seeing now, right? The transformative educator, the social justice educator. Um, and I want to caution parents to and have a conversation with the teachers because, especially the young ones, they don't know any better. They think this is the way good teaching is, quote unquote. And so investigate. They may not always fully recognize what they're doing as nefarious or what effects it has. So, that's kind of my little spiel as a former teacher is, assume ignorance to start with, not malevolence, right? On this note. Scott, kind of like in moving towards closing here, are there other action items or thoughts you have for parents who are listening that we kind of haven't hit on that you feel is important to convey?
Yeah, I mean, there's you know institutions like yours. You know, they live on getting parents who are offended or justly offended by what is going on in schools and reporting them to someone who can then publicize what is going on. There's lots of publicity on this stuff now, and that kind of heat should continue to be applied to our education system. And I very much agree that many of the teachers are uh, don't know any better and should be treated with some sympathy. I don't feel that way about the college professors, though.
Hmm.
Um, and so pushing for Florida style re regulation of the teacher certification process or for finding ways to loosen up teacher certification rules in your location, like that makes a lot of sense. There will be, there as teacher shortages pop up here and there around the country. One solution to that is loosening up teacher certification requirements, not requiring that teachers come from schools of education. And so I think just advocating for such things with your legislators, with your school board members, finding win-win solutions, not always leading with the ideology, but also with the problems that they have in staffing the school. These might be ways of getting more things done. But ultimately, these things are both personal and political, and so recognizing that means that you have laws or regulations that have to be changed, and that requires the activity of a real citizen. And in the meantime, in the short term, looking out for the charges that you have in your children is also something that each parent should do. So I think there's really no substitute for like a kind of active supervision or jealousy on these matters.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. Hey, and if people want to kind of follow you and keep up to date with the work that you're doing, where can they do that at?
Yeah, I mean, I post most of the things that I write on my Twitter account or on my LinkedIn account, and so those would be the places to do it. But the Claremont Institute, for whom I work on these matters, is very active in the field of education and exposing this stuff. And because we are really concerned with this new anti-discrimination regime that we have is really compromising our constitutional freedoms. So I would also recommend, following the work of the Claremont Institute generally, which can be done at the blog, The American Mind, where we host excellent articles each day, more than one, usually each day, and write on this more than a little.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Parents, I hope this conversation has been helpful and you've been able to take something away from today. If you haven't already, please check out Parents Defending Education's brand new investigative report, CorruptED, and see if a university in your state is teaching future students to be activists. As always, be aware of what your children are being exposed to and ask questions. If you find something concerning at your school, please reach out to us at defendinged.org. Share this video with a friend and tag us. Thank you again, Scott, and we'll see you next time, everyone.
Thank you, Ryan.